They say they love you, but they avoid you when you show who you really are. And you feel it. You feel it in the sudden silence, in the change of tone, in the looks that no longer look at you the same way. They surround you with affection, but only as long as you remain small, controlled, comfortable for them. Maybe the problem was never what you do. Maybe what bothers you is what you do, and its essence, its soul, its frequency. And as Rumi said, the soul has its own frequency, and not everyone can bear to hear its melody, because her soul sings truths that many spend their lives trying to silence. Have you ever noticed how your light attracts, but also frightens? How your brightness enchants from afar, but disturbs up close? It's not about you being good or bad. It's about you being dark real. And in a world where everyone wears masks, authenticity is seen as a threat. Your presence is unsettling because it reveals something. Your depth makes the shallow uncomfortable. Your intensity overflows where only the surface exists. And even when you love purely, offer generously, extend your hand truthfully, still they recoil, as if something in you mirrors something in them that they don't want to see. And perhaps, at some point, you've wondered, why do I feel so lonely even when surrounded by people? It's because not everyone can be near an awakened soul. Not everyone can bear the light that illuminates their own emptiness. You learn to mold yourself, to silence yourself, to soften your intensity in order to be accepted. But deep down, this hurts you more than rejection, because denying your soul is dying in silence. And now you're here, feeling everything, questioning everything, maybe for the 1000th time, maybe for the last. But there's something no one has told you about the pain of being shunned for being genuine, something that could change the way you look at all of this, and at yourself. Are you ready to hear what Rumi would reveal about that? So stay with me, because what comes next isn't easy, but it may be the key to the liberation your soul has been silently yearning for. So before continuing, write here in the comments, "I'm not going to hide who I am anymore." This phrase is a seal, a silent commitment to your soul. And if this first part touched something in you, a memory, a pain, a truth, then don't let it pass. Click like now. This helps this content reach other souls who, like you, are tired of living in hiding. And subscribe to the channel because what we're about to reveal goes far beyond words. It's about breaking cycles. It's about waking up for good. And this is just the beginning. Have you ever felt that the people around you admire you, but at the same time, distance themselves from you? As if your presence is only welcome up to a certain point. As long as you conform to their expectations, you are loved. As long as you adapt, you are accepted. But as soon as you start showing your truth, your essence, your rawest soul, the atmosphere changes. You notice the different looks, the messages that diminish, the silences that increase. There's no fight, no clear rupture, but you feel it. And that feeling, even without words, screams inside you. The reality is that many say they want connection, but few can handle the depth. They surround you with affection as long as you fit into their narrative, as long as your presence serves to fill their void, as long as your energy is an extension of what they can bear to feel. But when you begin to see yourself, when you begin to heal, when you decide to no longer negotiate your soul, something changes. And often, that something hurts. Because rejection doesn't come from enemies. It comes from those who said they would be by your side. It's subtle, almost imperceptible. A distancing without explanation, an affection that becomes apathy, and you ask yourself, what did I do wrong? But perhaps the question was never about wrong. Perhaps the truth is that your light begins to bother when it ceases to be comfortable for others. Because a soul in the process of awakening exposes the slumber of others. An expanding soul threatens those who still live trapped in personas. You try to fit in, not out of weakness, but out of a need for connection. After all, we all crave belonging. But there comes a point in the spiritual journey, and you may be in it now, when the price of belonging starts to become too high. You realize that to be accepted, you need to cut pieces of yourself away. You need to laugh at what you don't find funny. You need to be silent when your soul wants to speak. You need to pretend you don't feel when, in fact, you feel everything. And the more authentic you become, the more alone you seem to get. And that's confusing, because you were taught that being true to yourself was the path to freedom. But nobody told you that freedom is scary, that being yourself requires courage, but also exposes you to loneliness. Because not everyone is ready to live with someone who doesn't pretend, someone who feels deeply, who sees beyond the surface, who carries silence, but also intensity, who loves but doesn't erase themselves to be loved. Perhaps you are in that moment right now, where you realize that the more you heal, the more you lose. You lose friends, you lose spaces, you even lose yourself on some days. But this loss is not punishment. It's transition. It's the process of separation between what keeps you captive and what calls you to awaken. Your soul is growing, and what doesn't grow with you naturally drifts away. The invisible problem is that the world was made to level down, to love what is shallow, to comfort what is predictable. So when you refuse to be superficial, when you begin to seek the sacred instead of the social, the convenient becomes unbearable, and little by little you stop fitting into the old places. Conversations lose their meaning. Parties become too noisy. Bonds seem empty. But this is not a sign of failure. This is a sign of spiritual expansion. You feel the emptiness, but it's a fertile emptiness. It seems lonely, but it's sacred, because it's in it that you find yourself. It's there, when no one understands you, that you begin to understand yourself, and then the pain of rejection begins to change shape. It becomes silence, then reflection, then strength, and one day, even if that day seems distant, it transforms into peace. Not the peace that others give you, but the peace that is born when you finally stop running away from yourself. If all of this makes sense to you, if this truth resonated with you somewhere inside, write it in the comments. I refuse to shrink myself to fit in, because this phrase isn't just a choice, it's the beginning of a journey. And those who feel it know, the soul doesn't lie. Perhaps what bothers them isn't what you do, but who you are. And deep down, you've already realized that. It's not your behavior that causes discomfort. It's your frequency. It's the vibration your soul emits when you're aligned with the truth. Most people don't distance themselves because you've changed, but because your change has revealed how trapped they still are. Spiritual awakening has this side effect. It illuminates. And those who still live in the shadows, those who still depend on the ego to exist, are frightened by this light. Your light. Have you noticed that as soon as you start to assert yourself, to speak more firmly, to protect yourself emotionally, people start to label you? Cold, distant, arrogant, selfish. They say you're acting strangely, that you're not the same anymore. And perhaps in part they're right. You know it's more or less the same. Because whoever begins to awaken to their soul inevitably disconnects from the persona they used to survive. The spiritual root of this pain you feel isn't in the abandonment itself, but in how much you still try to understand rejection through logic. But this rejection isn't personal, it's energetic. You have risen, and when a soul rises, it begins to unsettle those who aren't yet ready to grow. Your presence activates the fears the other tries to hide. Your gaze reveals the lie the other told themselves. Your silence confronts. Your truth liberates, but also frightens. Rumi said, "The awakened soul disturbs those who are still asleep." Because an awakened soul doesn't need to prove anything. It doesn't live for approval. It doesn't beg for love. And that's what bothers people. Because the world has been trained to feel superior to others through the pain it causes, not the healing it offers. When you stop asking permission to exist and begin to occupy your place with dignity, the masks fall, the false bonds break, the conditional affections are revealed. And it's at this moment that you realize the pain you're feeling isn't loneliness, it's disconnection. You're not isolated, you're being redirected. Life, through emptiness, is distancing you from what no longer serves you. But it's hard to accept this when your mind screams for explanations, when your heart still expects a return, when your body carries memories of bonds that seemed genuine, and even knowing that you're evolving, it still hurts to see those you loved drifting away. But this is the part of the journey that almost no one talks about, the stretch where there is no audience, where there is no recognition, where there are no embraces, only echoes, where the only company is your own shadow, where spirituality doesn't smell of incense but of fear, of loss, of darkness, because awakening doesn't begin with peace, it begins with rupture. And you are here, going through this, feeling this rupture unfolding inside, feeling your old selves dissolving. Your old certainties falling like dry leaves, and everything seems uncertain, fragile, unstable. But within this chaos, something is being born, something sacred, something that doesn't yet have a name, but that is you, in your truest form. This pain is part of childbirth. The soul is reborn, consciousness expands, and every birth has blood, has cries, has silence. You are not breaking. You are letting go of what is no longer you. And each part that hurts is a part that is being seen for the first time, because now you have eyes to see, and the soul can only be freed when it is looked at without fear. Maybe you don't need answers right now. Maybe what you need is the courage to keep feeling, without judging yourself, without sabotaging yourself, without trying to rush what can only be experienced with presence. Because healing doesn't happen when you understand everything. It happens when you accept feeling what you've avoided for so long. And if you've made it this far, reading each word with an open heart, there's a reason. Something within you recognized this truth, not as a pretty idea, but as something that vibrates, that pulsates, that calls out. And it is with this awakened presence that we will continue. Write in the comments if this part spoke to your soul. I accept being who my soul is calling me to be. This phrase is the beginning of the surrender, because accepting who you are is the first step to stop hiding. What nobody tells you is that being rejected isn't a sign of weakness. It's actually one of the first signs that something inside you has begun to move towards your true nature. It's not easy to accept this when all you wanted was belonging, when all your soul begged for was a safe place where you could be who you are, without fear, without masks, without censorship. But the truth is that the path to authenticity demands a price. And the price is almost always the rupture with what once seemed like love, but deep down was just attachment disguised as care. Rumi said, "Don't lament being excluded from the circle. You were made to create your own." And there's a hidden pain in that phrase, not from the exclusion itself, but from the time you spent trying to fit in where you weren't meant to be, trying to mold your light so as not to disturb the darkness of others, trying to diminish your spirit to be tolerated by those who can only handle relationships where the other person doesn't surpass their own limitations. But there's a hidden liberation here, a silent calling. Because being rejected by the wrong people is the beginning of the reunion with what is right for your soul. This is the hidden key. The pain of rejection carries within it the map of your true path. While you see it as a loss, you suffer. But when you begin to see it as a sign, you awaken. Because what you called abandonment was the universe making room. Because what you called loneliness was preparation for something deeper. Because what you called injustice was protection. Protection from something that perhaps didn't fit into what your soul needs to experience now. How many times have you insisted on doors that wouldn't open? How many times have you blamed yourself for relationships that crumbled when you began to heal? How many times have you mistaken your evolution for error simply because others didn't keep up? This happens when you still measure your worth by the gaze of others. But the soul isn't measured by recognition. The soul is measured by expansion. And yours is in the process of profound expansion. It's difficult to understand this when you're in the midst of pain. The ego wants immediate answers. It wants to know why it wasn't enough, why it was left behind, why it wasn't seen. But the spirit, it knows. It understands that the departure of others isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's simply the natural consequence of a new frequency. And this new frequency, higher, more aligned with the sacred that dwells within you, naturally expels what no longer vibrates at the same level. This doesn't mean you're alone. It means you're being filtered, refined, polished, like a precious stone that passes through fire before revealing its brilliance. And it's precisely when you think you've lost everything that you begin to discover who you truly are. Because when you have nowhere left to run, no one left to hide from, the only path left is the one within. And there, in the profound silence of your own being, you find a truth that no one ever told you. You never needed to be accepted. You only needed to accept yourself. This is the key that liberates, the key that breaks through, the key that begins. When you stop waiting for permission to be who you are, you begin to live. And yes, it will hurt. It will hurt to leave behind those who didn't know how to love you. It will hurt to let go of what seemed essential. It will hurt to unlearn the need to please. But there is a kind of pain that doesn't destroy. It reveals. And that pain is sacred. It is the flame of your transmutation. You will begin to realize that certain silences are not contempt, they are answers. That certain distances are not failures, they are directions. That certain endings are not losses, they are doors. And you will understand little by little that what is coming is much greater than what remains, because now it is your soul that is in command. And the soul knows the way, even when you are still in the dark. What seemed like an end now sounds like a beginning. What seemed like rejection now reveals itself as liberation. What seemed like absence reveals itself as space, a sacred, fertile space, ready to be occupied by your most complete presence. No longer a piece, no longer the adapted version, but you, with all your shadows and lights, with all your intensity, your sensitivity, your truth. If this truth resonated with you in a profound, silent yet undeniable way, leave a comment. I trust in the space that pain has opened up. Because that phrase isn't just an answer, it's a seed. And when you plant that seed, something begins to bloom inside. Even if, on the outside, it still feels like winter. Perhaps you've lived through this. Perhaps you don't need to think too hard to remember. Perhaps you're still living it now. A repetitive cycle, almost invisible, but profoundly painful. You began to heal. Not dramatically, not always with words or explicit decisions. But something inside you began to tire of being hurt in silence. You began to speak more truthfully. You began to say no when before you smiled and accepted everything. You began to listen to yourself more seriously than you listened to the expectations of others. And then, almost imperceptibly, people started to disappear. They disappeared from messages, from meetings, from conversations that once seemed constant. They disappeared from promises, from intimacy, from affection. First like someone who drifts away for lack of time, then like someone who no longer sees any point in staying. And you stayed there, trying to understand. Was it me? Was I too harsh? Did I demand what couldn't be given? But the truth, naked and raw, is this. It wasn't because you changed too much. It was because you finally showed up. For a long time, perhaps your soul has hidden behind roles. The role of the person who understands everything, who forgives even before receiving apologies, who supports others while crumbling inside, who adapts, who remains silent, who swallows. But healing is, above all, ceasing to do that. Healing is leaving the stage as a character and entering as the protagonist of your own existence, and the price for that is not always applause. Sometimes it is emptiness, because you start to vibrate differently. You begin to emit an energy that no longer fits in certain environments. You begin to realize that your soul demands respect, presence, reciprocity. You begin to realize that the love you want is no longer what you accept. You begin to see that what you previously called connection was in fact neediness, that what once seemed like intimacy was just convenience. And when your consciousness awakens, everything that was based on illusion begins to crumble. This is where many give up. Because seeing the truth is beautiful until it touches what is most sacred, your bonds, your relationships, your emotional certainties. But the call of the soul is stronger than the desire to maintain appearances. And even unwillingly, even in pain, even trembling, you begin to walk, to go out, to let go. And yes, it seems unfair, because you expected your healing to bring people closer. But most of the time it reveals who was never truly there. You start talking less, and that bothers people. You start demanding less, and that frustrates them, because many only knew how to relate to their submissive version, the one that said yes out of fear of losing, the one that explained itself all the time, the one that accepted crumbs and still smiled. But that version died, not all at once, little by little, every sleepless night, with every swallowed tear, with every indigestible silence. And then a new one was born. A version that, instead of begging for love, began to choose peace. That instead of trying to fit in, began to step outside. That, instead of accepting being a shadow, decided to be light, even if it was blinding. And at that moment, the pain of loss mixes with the joy of liberation, because you begin to see clearly. Those who only loved you when it was convenient never truly loved you. Those who disappear when you begin to value yourself were never really there. And those who distance themselves when you begin to heal couldn't bear to see your soul in its fullness. They didn't disappear because you became bad. They disappeared because the healed version of you forces them to see themselves, and not everyone is ready for that mirror. This pain doesn't need to be denied. It's legitimate. It's grief, a kind of emotional death, but there's beauty in it, because the soul, even bleeding, knows it did the right thing. It knows it returned home, that it stopped betraying itself, that it stopped offering love where there was no fertile ground, that it finally chose itself, not as an act of selfishness but as a return to its center. Perhaps you are currently in that interval, between what you have let go of and what has not yet arrived, between the painful silences and the peace that is still uncertain. But this place, however empty it may seem, is sacred. It is here that the soul reorganizes itself, that the spirit is strengthened, that the ego is silenced, that the new begins to be designed. If you're feeling this way, if your truth is hurting right now, know this. This too shall pass. But first, it will transform you. And this transformation won't make you a different person. It will make you, finally, whole. If all of this affected you in any way, write it in the comments below. I am the version of myself that no longer hides. Because when you declare this truthfully, something inside you begins to align. And that's where the magic begins. People are comfortable with your pain, but not with your awakening. And this, although it may seem cruel, is more common than you imagine. While you are hurt, vulnerable, trying to pick up the pieces of yourself, there is a strange form of acceptance in the air. A silent acceptance disguised as care, but which, in reality, serves the other person more than you. Because your pain, even deep, is still a place where the other person feels superior. A space where they can offer help without needing to question themselves. While you suffer, they can be the strong one. While you stumble, they feel stable. While you sink, they feel they are above. But when you begin to awaken, when your consciousness expands, when your energy changes shape and begins to emit truths, there is an immediate discomfort. Because your transformation, even silent, is a mirror. A painful mirror that shows the other how stagnant they still are. How much they still pretend, how much they settle, how much they have chosen to survive instead of living. Your ascension breaks the unconscious pact of relational mediocrity that many establish. I accept your wounds, as long as you accept mine, and don't force me to heal them. And when you break free from that, there's no celebration. There's tension, there's distance, there's resistance. You're no longer the same, and that scares them. Because now, you start speaking more clearly, setting firm boundaries, not accepting what you previously swallowed in silence. You stop asking permission to be who you are, and in a world where so many still live from fear, attachment, neediness, and convenient lies, that's an act of rebellion. Your evolution begins to deconstruct the scenario where you were once an emotional supporting character. Now you occupy space, and not just any space, your space. The space that for so long was occupied by others' expectations, projections, subtle manipulations. Now you begin to inhabit your own soul. And this is dangerous for those who still related to you through control, because when you awaken, you become free, and those who lived in your emotional prison begin to lose control. They don't say it with words, but you feel it in the air. The look changes, the conversation cools, the exchange becomes uncomfortable. You realize that intimacy was in fact a game of mirrors, and now that you've changed the reflection, the game is over. It's not about hurt feelings, nor is it always about anger. Often, it's just fear. Fear of what you're becoming. Fear of who you'll attract now. Fear that you no longer need them. And that hurts. Because deep down you want your healing to inspire. For your growth to bring more light to relationships. For your truth to serve as a portal to greater depth. But it's not always like that. Because not everyone wants to grow. Growing hurts. It demands renunciation. It demands looking inward. And you know, not everyone is ready for that. Not everyone wants to stop being a victim. Not everyone wants to give up the comfort of blaming others. Awakening demands responsibility, and you are choosing that path. That's why your presence, now more genuine, begins to provoke. You enter a room, and the energy changes. Conversations end. Masks slip. What was once easy now seems tense. And no, you're not being arrogant. You're simply aligned with your soul, and this alignment reverberates. It breaks patterns, it unmasks, it demands that others look at themselves, and not everyone can handle this mirror. Perhaps that's why you've begun to prefer silence, solitude, the company of your own thoughts. Perhaps that's why you've distanced yourself without fanfare, because you realize that not every connection is worth maintaining, that some relationships were built on your pain, and now that the pain is healing, the foundation is disappearing. It's hard to see this, but it's necessary, because an awakened soul can no longer feed on bonds that don't sustain truth. And here you are, looking at all of this, feeling all of this, living this paradox. The more you find yourself, the more you seem to distance yourself from others. But this is not a definitive distancing. It's a space, a sacred interval, a pause between who you were and who you are becoming. And in that interval, there is something that no one can take away from you, the awareness that your soul is alive. If you feel this is your moment, if these words resonated silently but firmly within you, write them in the comments. My soul will no longer be shaped by fear. This phrase is more than an answer. It's a decree. Because when you choose to follow your soul, you might cause some discomfort, but you'll never again be silenced. You are not alone. You are just ahead. This is a truth that few manage to hear amidst the noise of abandonment, amidst absence, amidst the loneliness that settles in when the soul begins to expand. Because when you awaken, when you begin to see beyond surfaces, the world around you doesn't awaken with you. The cycles continue to turn, but you no longer turn with them. And that's why, because of this difference in rhythm, because of this difference in vision, it seems that you are alone. But the loneliness of awakening is not real loneliness. It is merely the silence that comes before true reconnection. There comes a moment during the process of spiritual expansion when you look around and no longer recognize anyone, not even yourself. Familiar faces seem distant. Conversations seem empty. The bonds that once nourished you now seem to drain you, and you feel an emptiness you can't name, a sensation of being between worlds, of no longer belonging to the old, but not yet having access to the new. It is at this moment that many give up, that many return, that many silence their soul to fit in again. But you weren't born to fit in. You were born to break molds. Rumi wrote, "Don't get lost trying to fit into a space your soul has already outgrown." And how many times have you tried? How many times have you returned to places you knew you shouldn't be, just to avoid feeling that emptiness? How many times have you diminished yourself, silenced yourself, faded away, all to maintain connections that no longer sustained your truth? This is the cycle of the soul that awakens and, at the same time, fears being alone. But being ahead is not being lost. Being ahead is being called to prepare a new path. Being ahead is being the first to see what many still pretend not to see. You haven't lost people. You've simply stopped losing yourself in order to keep them. And that changes everything. Because now, every step is yours. Every choice carries your truth. Every decision honors your soul. There's no more room for false versions, for concessions that tear you apart, for relationships that demand you be half. The path now is one of wholeness. And that requires courage. Courage to keep going even when no one else walks beside you. Courage to uphold your truth even when it's uncomfortable. Courage to say, "This doesn't work for me anymore," even with a trembling voice. You are not alone, but it's true that you are cleaner, lighter, more real. And what goes away in this process was never truly yours. Because truth doesn't abandon you. Truth isn't frightened by your light. Truth doesn't demand that you extinguish yourself. Truth remains. And what doesn't remain was an illusion of love, of acceptance, of belonging. And now, in the silence after the fall of these illusions, space emerges, a space where your soul can finally breathe. This space hurts, but it also heals. It is empty, but also fertile. And if you have the courage not to fill it in haste, if you have the patience to feel the discomfort of reconstruction, you will see a new version of yourself blossom there. A version that doesn't need to prove anything, that doesn't live in the shadow of the need to please, that no longer trades presence for attention, a version that knows that being ahead is also about carrying light for those who will come after. Because yes, your soul is a beacon, even when you can't see your own light, even when you feel like nobody understands you, even when everything seems uncertain, you continue to be a path for others, even without knowing it. Your presence is already an invitation for others to see themselves too. And even though everything seems fragmented and disconnected now, An invisible order is forming within you. A new alignment, a new axis, a new ground. You don't need to go back. You don't need to regress. You no longer need to fit where there's no more space. You need to move on, even with fear, even in silence, even alone. Because it's not loneliness. It's spiritual leadership. It's autonomy. It's maturity. It's the sacred revealing itself within you. And that demands space. The old no longer fits because you've grown, because your soul has expanded. And expansion always comes with breaking away. Not because you're wrong, but because you're ready. If you feel this is the path for you, that these words translate what you haven't been able to explain even to yourself, write in the comments, I accept the space that my soul has asked for, because this silent acceptance is often the greatest cry for freedom your soul can give. And only those who have been in that space know the strength it takes to keep going. You were made to disturb, and that's not a mistake, nor a personality flaw, nor something that needs to be corrected. It's a mission, a deep mark of your existence. From an early age you felt you didn't fit in, that your presence caused something. Discomfort, reaction, silence. You entered rooms and felt stares. Not because you were loud, not because you spoke loudly, but precisely because your energy said what your mouth couldn't yet name. It was your light announcing itself, even when you still lived in the shadow of your own doubt. And for years you tried to disguise that light. You tried to stifle it, hold it back, recalculate it, as if you could regulate the intensity of your soul to make it more bearable, more digestible, more acceptable. But the more you tried to please, the more you lost yourself, because your soul was never made to fit. It was made to expand, and what expands is unsettling, because that which shines, even unintentionally, reveals the darkness of others, not out of arrogance, but out of presence, a presence that makes no apology for existing, that light you carry, that clarity you can no longer hide, that intensity that pulsates in your every gesture. It is necessary. It's not for everyone, but it's for those who are ready, because your soul as it is didn't come to confirm conveniences. It came to expose truths, to break cycles, to ignite what is lukewarm, to awaken those who are still sleeping within. And that scares, it bothers, it disturbs, because a living soul demands that others awaken. You feel it when you speak and the other person falls silent, when you arrive and the atmosphere feels heavy, when you love and the other person withdraws, because your way of feeling reveals how much the other person no longer feels. Your depth demands diving, and not everyone wants to leave the surface. Your complete surrender reveals the absences that the other person insists on hiding. That's why you hear phrases like, you're amazing, you feel everything, you complicate what was simple. But the truth is that your intensity only reveals how accustomed the other person has become to shallow relationships. And here's the point. Your mission isn't to be palatable. Your mission is to be whole, even if it bothers some, even if it costs you distance, even if it breaks silent pacts of conformity. Because pleasing is easy, revealing is sacred, and your light didn't come to decorate, it came to illuminate, to show, to awaken. And sometimes, for that to happen, you need to walk alone, not by choice, but out of coherence. Accepting your intensity is an act of courage. In a world that teaches you to soften, to recalculate, to fit in, being whole is a revolutionary act, and you are on that path. The path of someone who has stopped apologizing for being sensitive, for seeing too much, for feeling too much, for wanting too much, because now you understand that the pain of not being accepted was never greater than the pain of abandoning yourself. And you no longer want to abandon yourself, even if it means losing people, because no presence is worth the price of your absence from yourself. Honoring your soul means accepting that you weren't born to repeat patterns, that you weren't born to please expectations, that you will no longer trade your peace to be included. And if that means the path will be more solitary, so be it, because the solitude of truth is still lighter than the crowd of lies, and you know it, you feel it. Deep down, something within you has already understood that your truth is your home, and that everything that separates you from it, however beautiful it may seem, is exile. Walking, even alone, is the greatest act of self-love your soul can do for you, because there are moments in the spiritual journey when the only possible step is inward, inward into silence, inward into emptiness, inward into the absence of applause. And in that place, where there is no audience, where there is no validation, you find what you have always sought, the freedom to be. You are intense. You are truth. You are a portal. And even when you doubt yourself, even when you think you are losing yourself, know this: you are finding yourself. Because losing yourself to what was false is the first step to rediscovering what is real. And you are in that exact moment. Don't try to go back. Don't try to fit in. Don't try to edit yourself. Your soul has already expanded, and what has already expanded doesn't return to its former size. If you feel you've reached this point in your journey that there's no turning back, write in the comments, "I walk with my intensity." This phrase is a silent affirmation, a reminder, a soundless cry, because those who walk with their own intensity, even if it disturbs the world, no longer betray themselves, and that is what truly sets you free. You have been touched by something sacred, and whoever doesn't recognize the sacred will always try to silence your voice. Rumi didn't just write poetry, he wrote mirrors, phrases that pierce, that reveal, that lay bare the soul of someone who can no longer pretend. And this perhaps is one of the most real for you at this very moment, because you feel it, you know it. No matter how much they try to convince you otherwise, there is something in you that is not ordinary. It is not fragile. It is not random. It is sacred. And this sacredness has a name. It has strength. It has sound. And yet, many times it has been silenced by looks that diminished you, by words that reduced you, by affections that came with the condition that you wouldn't be so much, that you wouldn't be whole. Perhaps since childhood you felt this calling. Something within you was already different. Not better, not superior, just more sensitive, deeper, more connected. While others lived in noise, you listened to silences. While others shouted to be seen, you hid to feel. And even without knowing how to name it, something was already pulsing inside, asking for space, asking for truth, asking for expansion. But the world never knew what to do with souls like yours. So it tried to silence you. It tried to mold you. It tried to transform your sacredness into weakness. You were conditioned to believe that feeling was an exaggeration, that thinking differently was rebellion, that speaking truthfully was inconvenient. And little by little, you swallowed your light, hiding your gifts, silencing your intuition, lowering your frequency to remain acceptable, kind, present. But something in you never truly went out. Something resisted. Something whispered, even on the darkest days, even in the deepest silences. A part of you knew you weren't from here, or at least you weren't made to behave as the world expected, and it was that whisper that brought you here. It was what kept you strong when everything was falling apart. It was what pushed you forward when the ground gave way beneath you. It was what made you keep believing even without proof, even without guarantees, even without support. That sacredness within you, that frequency that no one understands but everyone feels, is your divine signature, your spiritual mark, your inner beacon. And now, after so many falls, after so many silences, after so many attempts to extinguish your essence, it is ready to be heard. Don't lower your frequency just because others can't raise theirs. That's one of the hardest lessons the soul needs to learn, because the instinct of love is to descend, to accompany, to try to save. But there are times when that becomes betrayal, betrayal of oneself, betrayal of the mission, betrayal of the truth. You can no longer pretend you don't feel what you feel. You can no longer tolerate what makes you sick. You can no longer accept what distances you from yourself, not out of pride, but out of respect, out of honor, out of the dignity of someone who has finally understood their own worth. And yes, you will still be misunderstood. You will be rejected by those who can't stand to see someone whole. You will be judged by those who live only half a life. You will be questioned by those who never had the courage to ask themselves questions, but now that no longer paralyzes you, because you know that their silence isn't about you. It's about them. It's about their inability to recognize what they haven't yet been able to access within themselves. You no longer need to explain yourself. You no longer need to convince. You no longer need to prove. Your walk is already a prayer. Your silence is already healing. Your presence is already spiritual work. And those who have eyes to see, will see. Those who have ears to hear, will hear. Those whose soul is willing to awaken, will feel. because your vibration speaks before any word. Your energy enters the room before your body, and those who truly have something to share with you will not try to mold you. They will recognize you. You are not broken. You are being refined. You are not lost. You are being redirected. You are not lonely. You are being prepared. And however narrow, dark, and silent the path may seem, know this: every soul touched by the sacred must cross this valley, because it is in this valley that firmness is born. It is there that the persona dies. It is there that the essence takes shape. And if you've made it this far, if these words continue to resonate with you, if your breathing changed during this video, if your soul is vibrating differently now, then you are ready. Ready to no longer return to what was too small. Ready to no longer silence what screams within you. Ready to no longer hide from yourself. If everything you felt in that moment resonates as truth, as liberation, as a sign, then write it in the comments. My frequency is my truth. This phrase is the anchor. It's the center. It's the point of return whenever they try to disconnect you from who you are. Because those who live by the frequency of the soul, even if misunderstood, are at peace. If this video spoke to you, if you felt that somewhere inside you, something awakened, then subscribe to the channel now. Here is a space where your soul is welcome, where your intensity is sacred, where your pain is understood and transformed into awareness. And if this content touched you, moved you, revealed something to you, leave a like, because that shows you value this kind of content. And in addition, it helps this video reach other souls who, like you, are ready to remember who they really are. Now continue your journey. The next video is already on the screen, waiting for you. It's the next piece of this emotional puzzle we're putting together. Watch it to the end. You're ready for this.